Thank you for staying with us on Citizen Weekend. As promised, and I'm now joined by Dr. Hassan Kanenje, who's joining us virtually. And in studio, I have Dr. Fatma Ahmed Ali, who is an Associate Professor of International Relations. Together with them, we'll be taking a look at the security situation in the region. But as we do that, let us set the stage. We begin with Somalia, where on March the 18th, there was a bomb attack on the presidential motorcade in Mogadishu. And just the very next day, that is on the 19th of March, there were mortar attacks on Mogadishu's Aden Abdullah International Airport and the Halane base camp, which hosts UN staff. And that was on the 19th of March. Let's now take a look at the situation in South Sudan. And we begin with the conflict that we've been witnessing in the western part of the country, where Kir and Machar forces have clashed in western Equatoria. And aside from that, there has been conflict in the north of Sudan. Fighting between Kir forces and the Nuer, quote-unquote, White Army has broken out. This was on February the 14th, as you see there. And in response, a Machar ally general and the petroleum minister were arrested, and we saw Machar's residence surrounded by Kir forces. And Uganda has gone in, and they confirmed sending troops to Juba on March the 10th. Let's now take a look at the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And we go a little bit farther back than that monumental meeting between President Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame. We begin with the EU sanctions that were placed on Rwandan generals and M23 rebel leaders. This was on March the 17th. There was an immediate response from the M23 and the Congo River Alliance. They reconsidered their participation in peace talks that were to be held in Luanda. And in addition to this, Rwanda broke diplomatic ties with Belgium. And it was after all this that we saw that meeting between President Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame face-to-face in Qatar. I will start with you, Dr. Fatma. How significant, in your view, was that meeting? They talked about upholding a ceasefire. Is it a turning point in the conflict?
Good evening, Olive, and thank you for having me. I think it's important, the kind of event that has occurred. One thing to note is that I know most people are feeling surprised to see Qatar mediating, but they should know that Qatar has a leverage, and this leverage is the good economic ties that it has both with Rwanda and DRC Congo. And I think also having a country like Qatar, which does not seem to project, what Tshisekedi was refusing, to attend the East African Community meeting, the SADC meeting, with the fear that, there are interest or transactional interest from the leaders within the region. In this case, the transactional interest is already there in terms of partnership. And if you look at this event, is quite interesting in the sense that probably this is what is needed, when you have a country that can leverage, its ties, especially the trade that it has. For instance, Rwanda, Qatar has 49% stake with the Rwanda Air, and 60% with a new international airport that Rwanda is building just outside Kigali. So these are also very important. It means that they have trust. Both countries enjoy trust and good relations with Qatar, and that's why they were able to meet after a year, face to face, and have a joint agreement. Now, the only thing to watch is just immediately the next day, M23 captured another city. And I think M23, from my analysis, I would say that they know they will go to the table with the government of DRC, but they want to go to that table very strong, so they can have a good negotiation. Because if they are weak, then at the end of the day, they will not get what they really want.
Right.
So I think despite the peace truce between the two leaders, you saw they did that. And I think this is to send a message that by the time they come to the table, they're strong enough to be able to negotiate with the government.
All right, Dr. Kanenje, let me bring you in at that point. Some media outlets described the meeting between President Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame as a surprise. Was it a surprise to you?
I think it was a surprise to the extent that what people are actually looking at is the Luanda talks and the fact that M23 had just pulled out of those talks. Even Angola itself was surprised that actually the talks were taking place in Doha. So it appears they were not exactly consulted with that. However, it was very clear that the only way forward was for the two leaders to actually meet, because these are the two main players in the conflict. And so while the timing of it was surprising, the event itself was not surprising.
Okay, I read that the U.S. was among the players that were pulling the strings behind the scenes, because I saw later President Kagame meet some U.S. representatives.
Both countries have a decent relation with the United States, and the U.S. is a keen player and a country with a keen interest, of course. In recent days, you've seen Tshisekedi even make certain offers to the United States. And so you'll expect that they're going to play a role, especially using Qatar as a country that has built its reputation as a mediator between warring parties, not just on the continent, but actually outside. And so it is expected the U.S. is going to remain engaged. And I think it's telling that among the sanctions that were, of course, imposed, the U.S. is missing in action, which tells you, I think, they do not want to muddy the waters, and they want to maintain an agency with regard to playing a role in the resolution of that conflict.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Dr. Fatma Ahmed. The M23 was not represented at that table, at that meeting. Are we saying that Kagame speaks for M23 because they talked about upholding a ceasefire?
I wouldn't want to directly say that, but I think also it's quite important because it's one of the supporters, of M23. And that's why, as Dr. Kanenje has said, I think having Kagame is also very important. I think also if you look at the history of the conflict, this conflict stems from Rwanda. So Rwanda has to be on the table, whether it's directly supporting or involved in M23, because that is the root causes. That is where the point should start from, like solving that conflict in the first place. And I think also M23, even though there is that relation with Rwanda, but they also have their own agency, they also have their own interest, and it's clear with what they did the next day, capturing a town. And I think for them is as long as they capture all these mineral-rich towns, then that also gives them leverage in terms of negotiation. So, and I think it's very clear the kind of relationship that Rwanda has with M23 and the historical ties, of that conflict to Rwanda and, of course, to M23 as well.
All right. Dr. Kanenje, there was a point made by Rwanda immediately following that meeting, and that the EAC SADC, even in the joint statement, is summit or engagement process is the primary mechanism for these peace negotiations and talks. They're the driving force. But what does it say that Qatar was able to bring these two people within the same space physically, and that the EAC and SADC have failed to do so?
Yes. SADC and EAC, they face challenges in part because, one, personality differences, two, some competing and conflicting interests, and three, frankly, a degree of lack of trust, especially from Kinshasa, for these two bodies to be able to, engineer some kind of a mediation process that is going to be, acceptable. Now, Doha has ties with both countries. Doha is heavily invested in both countries and has an interest to develop that type of engagement. But considering its perception of neutrality and its success in diplomacy, especially in mediation, I think it was probably one of the ideal, centers to be able to convene that. But these are efforts, of course, that are going to be done within the framework of both SADC as well as EAC. There is a recognition even by the African Union that only a local African solution is going to do that. Because even if Qatar, for instance, were to be successful, there are certain guarantees that it cannot offer in the absence of regional countries and regional framework. Why? Because regional countries are involved, either directly or indirectly, either as a problem or solution to the conflict in DRC.
Is this a turning point in the conflict, in your view, Dr. Kanenje?
It may not be a turning point, but it's an added layer in mediation efforts, and it's an added and a welcome layer in mediation efforts, in part because of the credibility that is brought about by Doha and the success and the experience that comes with that. And perhaps to the extent that the two main protagonists are meeting, it is actually something that I think points to a brighter future. However, we can't say it's a significant turning point, but we can say it is a very welcome added layer to the peace efforts in Eastern DRC especially.
All right. Is it a breakthrough, Dr. Fatma Ahmed Ali?
I think it's an opportunity for the East African community and SADC to take this chance and create something, a framework that can work for both countries. And this also, I think, with the role that Qatar has already played by bringing the two countries together, that, as Dr. Kanenje said, it's not a turning point, but it's an opportunity. And I think it's an opportunity that has come timely, considering the situation in the region. And of course, the spillover that is about to happen, with the neighboring countries as well. So I think this also gives the region, like the two main organs of the region, the East African community and SADC, to immediately, start doing something. And of course, Angola, that is one of the main mediators, to also kind of think very quickly and a very innovative way how to come in and facilitate peace negotiation that brings the M23 on the table.
Because Rwanda, in the presidential statement right after, held its ground. It said the FDLR has to be addressed. It maintained what its issues are. Do you think these were discussed behind the scenes and maybe it was just not made public? Also some of these, first meetings, not everything is discussed. So it's just a matter of just creating the cordial appearance, and after a long silence and distrust. So I think later on we are going to see how things will unfold, especially with how it's received and who will take what responsibility. All right. There's actually something significant I did not touch on, Dr. Kanenje, if you don't mind, on the DRC. Rwanda breaking ties with Belgium after those, or in response, as it has been printed, to those EU sanctions.
Yeah, the Rwanda-Belgium relationship has been toxic. It's a love-hate relationship, I think, for many, many years. It has a checkered history with both Rwanda as well as DRC. Now, it is not surprising that Kigali moved to break up relations, because at the urging of Belgium, the EU moved to impose sanctions on some of the M23 operatives, as well as some senior commanders within the Rwanda military. And I think Rwanda took it very personally, considering the grudge that Rwanda still holds by accusing actually Belgium to having been complicit in the Rwandan genocide in 1994. And so it's not surprising that Rwanda has proceeded to do this, I think, as to make a powerful statement and the indictment of Belgium generally within the Rwandan political discourse, but also to communicate to the rest of the continent that perhaps, Belgium is not as clean as perhaps they may want to present themselves.
Anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so I think also it's a message to the EU as well. I think Kagame is a very kind of a transparent, clear leader. And I think also by doing that, it's also a message to the EU, where Belgium is the headquarters of the European Union, So this is also another political statement to also the European Union, the fact that they've gone ahead and actually tried to put a sanction because they are supporting and a way of deterring Rwanda for supporting M23. So I think it was a very clear message,
But the EU also made a very strong statement in the sanctions because, that list also had, I think, a Rwandan gold mining firm as well as a board and the CEO of the board. And they talked about we are sanctioning these individuals and these entities because they are fueling the conflict for illicit trade. And of course, the minerals in the DRC then comes to mind. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think the center of this conflict is the minerals. You know, it has a lot to do, and that's why you see it's super confusing to even map out the actors, to map out the reasons, to map out the dynamics. And I think also EU maybe thinks if they do that, that will also maybe help, you know, in the situation. But I think Rwanda, as was mentioned, took it personally, and also I think also it's because of that tension that they've had for a long time. Of course, the colonial relations with Belgium, and of course just sending a message to Belgium and to EU. This is also a political statement to say that you cannot interfere with these affairs, you know, even though this is done from a human rights perspective.
All right. Dr. Kanenje, let me move us a bit further up north, South Sudan. Should we be concerned that South Sudan could slide into another civil war?
Olive, South Sudan, it is indeed, you know, a tragic story. You know, it is the youngest baby on the continent, but it just appears to have been born with measles and so many other ailments. And, you know, we've been trying to fix it for a number of years. Now, following the revitalized agreement, I think there was expectation that actually by now you could actually have worked onto the elections as well as other aspects of that agreement. Of course, that did not work. Now, the process was taking place in Nairobi, the Tumaini Initiative. We hoped that it was going to offer some direction and some light towards, you know, a final consensus and where South Sudan is going to move on. Now, I think we're all aware that the suspension of Tumaini kind of removed some of that hope of getting back South Sudan back, you know, to right path. And so the fear, I think, is potential disintegration and an all-out war between not just the factions of Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, but other warring factions within Southern Sudan. Remember, they are actually numerous, you know, factions, all of them who, you know, which are armed. And so there is a real danger of getting back, you know, to a place in 2013, for instance, when things really got out of hand. And I think the responsibility for regional countries is to try and move in and arrest that situation and bring the parties back to a negotiating table. Because failure to do that at the time when the entire Horn of Africa region is in a state of flux and conflict-ridden, I think is going to be extremely dangerous, and we may be staring into an abyss that perhaps may be very, very hard to come out of if something is not done urgently and immediately.
Mm-hmm. Your thoughts, Dr. Fatma Ahmed, should we be concerned about a possible slide back into civil war?
Yeah, yes, definitely we should be concerned. And I think also it's not only that, but also you have to realize that also the spillover from Sudan is also another factor. So this, even though it's a new baby, but this is a new baby that was born from another state. And also there's a lot of ties, a lot of connection. As you know that Sudan, one of the biggest resources they have is their petroleum, which they actually use the pipes through Sudan to make their money. Now that is not there. Also there's a distrust, then the economical stress that is there. And of course, the fact that everybody has a military, standing military, also is another factor that actually fuels. And I think in Sudan, war is not a new event. You know, this is a country that has been fighting for over 50 years. And even from the time it is born, right? It is born right from the ashes of the war between them and the North. And that's why I think this is a very critical moment for both IGAD, AU, you know, all the actors that have been helping, even Kenya itself, that, you know, we've been always concerned because they are our neighbors and because of our policy of good neighborly. And I think we always want to enjoy being in a very peaceful environment. We shouldn't just watch and see this unfolding and then seeing how the two leaders confront each other with their military. I think there is need to really intervene very quickly because this might really go out of hand. And I think this time it will be even difficult to return because of the kind of distrust and, how do you say, a little bit of bad feelings, you know, being held over. And I think this is also something that has really been going on between the leaders since the day they were in the bush, you know. So it's like been building up. So it's going to be like an explosion, you know, a time bomb. And that's why I think it's really critical to really not wait and see. And I guess also in this region, countries have to be very careful when they intervene, you know, not to be seen that they're taking sides or they are, and I think we've learned from West Africa when other countries went into other countries to bring peace, and this really backfired. And I think that is what we are going to head into. When we are not using a peaceful mechanism, then it might backfire into even breeding more violence, you know, within that country.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Kanenje, because something that Dr. Fatma Ahmed has said that is actually interesting to me is she has said countries have to be careful when they intervene not to be seen to be taking sides. Uganda has been very clear that Kir is our man. Your thoughts?
Yes, Kampala, I think, is very decidedly, you know, partisan when it comes to the Sudan conflict. And they've been siding with Kir, you know, for many, many years. Before that, of course, it was the SPLM, you know, under government. But the first major intervention you saw, you know, happening in 2013 when there was that outbreak of the first, you know, civil war within, you know, South Sudan, and they've continued to do that. Of course, that type of intervention sometimes fuels the conflict further, even though it may strengthen one party, and in this case, it's going to strengthen, of course, it's meant to strengthen Salva Kiir. But then that does not bode well when it comes to regional mechanisms to resolve that conflict, because when the region itself is divided or has competing interests, or conflicting interests within it, then that intervention is not going to be trusted. And so the parties to the conflict are not going to trust. And that explains why some of these peace processes have actually failed. A lot of it because of the perception that some of the countries that are involved, they already have partisan interests. Of course, we know Uganda has economic interests, but there's also a fear of the refugee crisis, you know, on its border. But even then, I think the extent to which some of the countries have been involved in have not really been contributing to the neutral efforts to find a lasting solution in South Sudan. And so that intervention that is partisan is exactly not helpful. However, we can appreciate some of the concerns of neighboring countries such as Uganda to make sure that the conflict does not spill onto its territory.
All right, quickly, Dr. Fatma Ahmed Ali, your last word on Somalia. How worried should we be? Is this attack on the presidential motorcade out of the ordinary and therefore should signal or ring alarm bells?
I think the recent event that has happened in Somalia is quite alarming, and it's not something that we should just watch and just think, okay, it's ordinary. If you look at these two events, it speaks a lot about the strategy that Al-Shabaab has. One, the fact that they attempted an assassination on the president. Secondly, they attacked the airport when another leader is visiting the country, and of course the safest place in Mogadishu, which is the Halana airport. And this is also jeopardized a lot the stability of the Third Republic of Somalia. And not only that, but I think also they're taking advantage of the situation. One, being the center-periphery conflict between, or tension between the member states and the federal state, you know, especially with Puntland and Jubaland. So I think because the government is preoccupied with its own tension with its member state, so they are also taking advantage of that. Secondly, they're taking advantage because of the transition with the African Union mission. Now we have a new mission, and they know that this mission will not be approved tomorrow or today until May, when the Security Council meets to vote. And there, the United States is going to sit there and probably will not even allow or give fund. And secondly, also the U.S. foreign policy doesn't seem to come to really pay attention I mean, they know that there's a diminishing interest from the international partners that Somalia used to have. For instance, you know that Somalia benefited a lot from the U.S. relation because the special forces, which was the game changer in the fight against Al-Shabaab in 2023, is not going to receive as much attention. And of course, even the AMISOM, the new African Union mission, when it is renewed, it's not going going to enjoy, protect as it used to. Now it's going to go down to 20 to 30, as before it was 50. So I think this is also one of the things that, Al-Shabaab is already seeing, these gaps, and is taking advantage. And I think they're thinking this is the moment, now or never. And I think the strategy is different. They are not just doing to attack and whatever. Now it looks like they really want to go to the capital, because they're really demonstrating their capability of large-scale attacks, towards the capital and different places. So I think they're also realizing the gap, the weakness of the government at the moment, the lack of paying attention, and also the divided attention that the government has, because it has to have its own challenges. The opposition are also there demanding also the kind of initiative that the president wants to do is not in dialogue with everyone. Like the universal sovereignty. Somalia is going to go soon into the district elections, and there are some people who are making an argument and say, wait a minute, we're not ready for that. Let's go by the 2010 electoral law. Let's use the 2012 constitution. And the president seemed to be very adamant into leaving a legacy or reviving himself for another term. And I think all this also is what is giving Al-Shabaab now the opportunity. And I think this is a risk for the Third Republic of Somalia and the government of Hassan Sheikh.
Okay. There's a lot there to unpack, but we will have to dedicate a day for it. I want to thank Dr. Hassan Kanenje for joining us this evening, and you as well, Dr. Fatma Ahmed Ali. We take a break, but Citizen Weekend continues on the other side.